activity environments.
And I'll wait. Are you gonna
Recording
record it? Right. All right. I just want to go ahead and welcome everybody to the meeting today for our meeting this afternoon. And I just want to first of all welcome all the different groups and working members in attendance. Just so everybody is aware of who's attending. Also welcome members of the public. We have the Regional Planning Technical Working Group. We have the Active Transportation Working Group, the Cities and Counties Transportation Advisory Committee, the San Diego Regional Traffic Engineers Council, the Social Equity Working Group, the Energy Working Group, and the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council. Welcome everybody. The purpose of this forum is to discuss and collaborate on the Regional Early Action Planning Grants of 2021, or what's commonly known as RE 2.0 program, and how the $43 million in potential funding can help the San Diego region accelerate affordable housing production and reduce vehicle miles traveled. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Allison Wood and Nikki to go over the Mentimeter instructions and introduction questions. They're doing this to get a feeling of who is in attendance and how we can use Menti to see who's in the room, and also the familiarity with the RE 2.0 program. They'll also be using Menti to engage the attendees during the meeting and throughout the forum, as well as the public. With that, I'll turn it over to Allison and Nikki.
Thank you, Tate. Thanks everyone for being here today. As Tate mentioned, we're going to be using menti.com, and I'm going to ask Nikki to just provide some brief instructions, and then we'll get going on the first couple questions.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I was trying to come off mute. So for those who have not used Menti before, it's pretty simple. Either on your computer or on your phone, you can either scan this QR code or go to www.menti.com and then enter this code you see on the screen here. We can also put this information in the chat, but once you get signed in with this code or using this QR code, you should be able to, you should see kind of an instructions page and the option to either like or heart the instruction page. So let us know in the chat if you have any trouble with getting to the Menti page.
Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the first question. So let us know which SANDAG working group you are representing today. And if you're not a member of a working group, or if you're a member of a different working group at SANDAG, that's okay. We just want to get a feel for who we have in the room today. Looks like we have at least one person from each of the working groups, so that is good.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
I missed the part about the survey website. Is there instructions on it somewhere?
Sure, it's you can see in the bar on the top of the slide here. You can go to menti.com.
I'm not seeing it for some reason on top of the slide.
Okay, there's also instructions in the chat.
Yeah, I just found it in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, great. Great. Looks like we have a little over about 50 people who've been answering the question. Good. We've got our Regional Planning Technical Working Group and our Social Equity Working Group, Active Transportation with a number of members here. Okay. I think let's go ahead and go to the next question, Nikki. Okay, so now we want to get a feel for who's in the room in terms of what sector you are representing. So whether you're part of a local jurisdiction, another regional agency, nonprofit or CBO, academic, individual, lots of local jurisdictions and CBOs. That's great. Got a good mix of individuals. It's nice to see a lot of our local jurisdictions because we really want your input today and our CBOs. Great. Okay, we'll do one more question now. So just have you heard of RE 2.0? Have you heard of this program at all? Just so we can get a sense of where folks are coming from. Pretty good split, almost 50-50. That's great. Great. That is right down the middle. Amazing. Okay, so those are just our few kind of intro questions right now with Menti. We'll use Menti later in the meeting today to get some more input from you all on RE 2.0. So for now, I'll hand it back to you, Tate, as our chair for the meeting.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for participating in the introduction. That was always a fun exercise to do. Okay, let's go ahead and start item 2, which is the RE 2.0 presentations. We'll be following that with a discussion. We'll have 2 presentations regarding RE 2.0, one from the Department of Housing and Community Development and the other one from SANDAG. There'll be time for feedback and open discussion at the end of SANDAG's presentation. So I just ask that everybody hold their questions to the end of both presentations, and then we'll have plenty of time for feedback or discussion with the panelists. All right, I'll go ahead and I just want to welcome HCD staff, Marissa and Jose Luis. If you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa Prossi. Give me one moment while I share my screen with my slides, but very happy to be here with you today. So I am the project manager for RE 2.0 at HCD and joined by some of our HCD staff as well as some of our state collaborative partners on RE 2.0 today from the California Air Resources Board and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Jose, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, Jose Ayala, Housing Policy Specialist. I'll be the TA lead for the SANDAG region.
Great, thanks. So we just wanted to spend a couple minutes with you today and give just a quick high-level overview of the program at the state. So like I started to mention, so RE 2.0, HCD is the facilitator of the state working group that is administering RE 2.0, but we're joined by 3 other state agencies. So that is the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, or OPR, the California Strategic Growth Council, or SGC, and the California Air Resources Board. And that's really because, as I'll get into in this presentation, RE 2.0 is really starting to address multiple planning objectives at the same time and in coordination with one another. And so as a result, we're pulling from the expertise from these different state agencies to really administer and make this program what it should be. So a quick overview. So RE 2.0 comes about from a $600 million, it's a $600 million new grant program as part of the California Comeback Plan, which was funded under Assembly Bill 140 this past summer. So 500 million of those dollars comes from the Federal Coronavirus Fiscal Recovery Fund of 2021. And I'll get into it a little bit later. As a result, it has some COVID recovery aspects to it. And then 100 million that makes up the rest of that 600 million comes from the state general fund. So it supports projects across the state that help create additional homes near daily destinations. That's the kind of succinct kind of thesis statement of it. But by supporting infill housing production affordability goals and reducing vehicle miles traveled as some of those main goals that drive the program. So a little bit of background on how this program came to be. There's a few different factors that led to its creation. So the first is, a recognition that the state is not on track to meet its housing and climate goals. And also a realization of the co-benefits of planning for housing in ways that reduce VMT for public health, equity, land conservation, and economic goals, in addition to addressing housing and climate crises, as well as responding to some of the lasting effects and disproportionate impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, RE 2.0, the reason why we call it RE 2.0 is because before that there was RE 1.0, or known as the Regional Early Action Planning Grants of 2019. So RE 1.0 is different than RE 2.0 in a few different ways. The first was, it was a much smaller pot of funding than RE 2.0, so it was $125 million total, and had narrower uses that focus really on accelerating housing production through housing planning dollars. So I think, based on some of the early successes of that program, it's still ongoing. There is excitement around further investing in this kind of regional planning grants work. So those things combined with, state surplus, as well as the infusion of federal coronavirus aid package, led to the California legislature making a big investment in RE 2.0 this past summer. So a little bit of again, continuing on the program overview. So HCD and its state collaborative partners are in the early, approaching the middle stages of the program development for RE 2.0. So back in November and December, we put out an initial framework paper and survey laying out some of our initial thoughts and direction for the program for public input, really at the level of broad concepts. And so we received over 65 pretty detailed responses on that. And so over the last couple months, we've been processing that public feedback and having it guide how we are drafting the draft guidelines in NOFA. So that is currently, in our review with our agencies, and hoping to put that out for public comment in the coming weeks. So as far as who can access this funding, so I'll get into it in a couple slides. There's a few different buckets of funding that make up RE 2.0, but essentially it's, for regional planning agencies, counties and rural areas not part of regional planning agencies, and tribal entities are the main primary applicants for these first few buckets. Another difference that from RE 1.0 is that RE 2.0 is a grant program that funds not just planning activities, but also implementation activities. And so there's a number of broader uses that are eligible under that. So like I mentioned, some of the high-level goals of the program are accelerating housing production and affordability goals, reducing vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. In non-technical terms, having people drive less and be closer to daily destinations, enhancing governmental coordination, and advancing equity. And then lastly, kind of, the other kind of big overarching principle that is driving the, design of RE 2.0 is really this transformative emphasis, that these activities are meant to, be planned together, this kind of focus on combining these goals together, and change, start to transform in how we think about and act on land use patterns and activities and behaviors. So one of the slides that people are most interested in is the funding breakdown and how we can access the funding. So there are a few different buckets of funding that I can give a quick overview of here. So the primary bucket of funding that SANDAG falls under is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, MPO, over-the-counter allocations based on population. And this is 510 million. And so the allocations are based on 2030 projected population numbers. So that makes up the majority of the pot of funding. In addition, there is $30 million set aside for the rural counties not part of MPOs and tribal entities, and that's a competitive bucket of funding, whereas this is over the counter based on population. The third bucket of funding is this competitive higher impact transformative bucket of funding that will be released a little bit later than the others. And it's meant to, while all of the, uses funded under RE2.0 are meant to be transformative, really it's, for, activities that are, can be used as models throughout the state, are really doing a lot of interesting things together. And lastly, there's $30 million set aside for ECD and its state collaborative partners to administer the program and provide technical assistance and some other uses there. So in particular, the funding available to SANDAG is about $43 million. And there is an advanced application process that SANDAG can start to apply for as of January 1. That is about $4.3 million available for program startup costs, initial outreach, and priority setting to help determine the use of the broader maximum award amount. So, I think one of the core aspects of the program is really this Nexus requirement. So each application to satisfy housing, BMT reduction, and affirmatively furthering fair housing goals together through its proposed uses. And so really the things proposed in these applications really need to have a strong nexus to each of these goals here. Like I mentioned, so the majority of the funding is coming through federal COVID-19 relief dollars. And so as part of that, it's meant to address some of the negative economic impacts of COVID-19 and housing. And so there, a lot of that is through, how the programs serve disadvantaged communities and some other requirements that'll be baked into the program guidelines and notice of funding availability. So just to kind of briefly touch on some possible uses of funding. So these are some of the broad categories listed in statute. So accelerating infill housing development, realizing multimodal communities, shifting travel behavior by reducing driving and increasing transit ridership. We'll have further guidance in our guidelines and notice of funding availability on this topic. But really, it's meant to be a flexible program that a lot of different uses can be eligible as long as they have strong nexus to those program goals and objectives shown on the previous slides. So a high level timeline of the program. So like I said, we're in the midst of program development as state collaborative partners. As of January, the beginning of January, that advanced application was released that the MPO applicants can apply for 10% of their max amounts for those program startup costs and outreach efforts to get going on that work. In the coming weeks, we plan to release our draft guidelines for public comment. And so encourage SANDAG and its members to take a look at that and start to think about, if there's any comments that you want to submit on that. And then we anticipate towards the end of May, we'll release final guidelines and launch the program. Then later in the summer, we will release that 5% competitive, higher impact and transformative NOFA. And then I should say on that higher impact and transformative allocation, you know, all of the eligible entities are eligible or will be eligible under that program, as well as possibly some others. And then all of the applications will be due by the end of 2022. For the funding, there is an encumbrance deadline of June 2024, and then an expenditure deadline by June 2026. So like I mentioned, we put out a framework paper laying out some of our initial broad concepts back in November. You can find that on our website. That was accompanied by a survey where we got you know, a number of different comments. I believe some from SANDAG were included in that. Yep, I think I covered this in my talking points, but you should be seeing our draft guidelines in the coming weeks. And then happy to answer any kind of questions that may come up. And as well as if you want to contact us later at the state, this is our email as well as our website, which we're continuing to update with more information as it becomes available. Thanks.
Well, great. Let's go ahead and do this, Marissa. Let's and everybody for working group members, if you have any clarifying questions, let's go ahead and ask them now of HCD staff, and then we'll hear the presentation from SANDAG, and then we can follow up with perhaps more detailed questions or follow-up questions and discussion. So why don't we go ahead? I see a hand up from Craig Jones. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tate. Just to be clear, in the San Diego region, the eligible entities to receive this funding would be SANDAG and for their proportion, tribal organizations. Is that correct? It's limited to that?
So yeah, thanks. That's a good clarifying question. So SANDAG can choose to sub-allocate like they did with RE1.0, but there isn't necessarily you know, as of now, in our work, this could change with, as we, you know, we don't have draft, let alone final guidelines out yet, but, and there might not necessarily be a requirement to sub-allocate. And there's, you know, flexibility likely determined by the MPOs if they do sub-allocate, you know, how, you know, their methodology for sub-allocating. With, you know, some constraints around that of, you know, having an equitable process and whatnot. In terms of the eligible applicants themselves, so for that main 510 million bucket of funding, the main eligible applicant is SANDAG. You know, I think there are, you know, certainly, you know, tribal coordination and input in your priority setting, and outreach and possibly sub-allocation as SANDAG. But in addition, there's a separate bucket of funding, $30 million, that is set aside for, you know, a combination of non-MPO rural counties in the state as well as tribal entities. So the tribal entities can apply directly to HCD through that competitive bucket of funding for that $30 million.
Thank you. That helps clarify. I was interested specifically within the San Diego region. I think you've clarified that for me. Thank you.
And I would ask by a show of hands if anybody else has any additional clarifying questions that they would like to ask HCD staff. And also, if there's anything in the chat too, I would ask SANDAG staff if they could read those or let me know. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I do see a few comments in the chat. I think these will really be more appropriate after the SANDAG presentation and our discussion there. Some more of the specifics about what we're planning to do in our region.
Great. Allison, do you see any other hands? I'm not seeing any at this time. I just want to make sure.
So I do see a hand from an attendee. However, I do want to let folks know we'll do public comments later in the agenda. So if members of the public have comments, you'll have an opportunity to do that. And members of the public can also participate in those Menti questions to provide input.
Great. why don't we go ahead, seeing no hands from working group members at this time, why don't we go ahead, and Allison, you'll be presenting the Sandag presentation, and then that will be following up with questions, and then you also have another mentee questions for us at the end of your presentation.
Good.
I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone again for joining us today. Thank you, Marissa, for being here and providing that overview from the state. We're really excited about this funding opportunity and excited to get your input today. I recognize that we're early on in the process, but that's really helpful for us here at Sandag as we start to contemplate ideas for our application and making sure that we spend this funds in a way that's really beneficial to our region. So, and also this will be the first of many opportunities to be involved in the development of RE 2.0 for Sandag. Okay, next slide. So as you heard from Marissa, the RE 2.0 is really about meeting multiple objectives, including housing and climate and equity goals. And with the adoption of our 2021 regional plan, there are two critical targets that we are working toward. The first is building over 171,000 new homes by 2029 as part of our RENA plan, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions 19% by 2035 per our SB 375 goal. And these goals really do require the transformative planning and projects that RE 2.0 is really intended to serve. So we're excited to have the resources from this program to do that. And where we build housing is critical to aligning our housing and climate goals. So this map here displays some of the priority areas for growth and development that are part of the 2021 regional plan and our SCS. So first, we have the transit priority areas in green on this map. These are the areas surrounding major transit stations. And then second, these pink and purple areas are our mobility hub areas. And these are areas that align with the transportation investments of the plan and our opportunities to really expand mobility options and bring future growth and development together. We've identified 5 different types of mobility hubs that you can see on the map here. And this is just really acknowledging that the different areas across the region have different needs and different solutions for different communities. So with that sort of context from the regional plan, let's get into some more details about REAP. So we're preparing for the REAP 2.0 funding allocation while we're still implementing our REAP 1.0 program. So you'll notice the REAP 1.0 program was a much smaller program, again, with that targeted focus on housing, planning, and RENA implementation. And for REAP 2.0, we're anticipating that $43 million. And again, a broader focus across multiple objectives that Marissa went over. So again, we feel a really tremendous opportunity here at Sandag with this funding, and we're really excited to develop a program to really implement these transformative projects. Next slide. So with REAP 1.0, for those of you who are not as familiar with this program, I wanted to go over just some of the activities that have been underway to give you all some ideas as we think about REAP 2.0. So this slide, we've organized these activities in these 3 areas: local jurisdiction support, data analysis and policy resources, and regional initiatives. And under local jurisdiction support, this includes our grant programs for local jurisdictions. So about half of the REAP 1.0 funds we put towards our housing acceleration program grant call for projects that recently closed, and we'll be making those awards shortly. We've also used those funds to offer technical assistance to local jurisdictions and to develop our sustainable communities on call so that we have consultant services available at both Sandag and for our member agencies to tap into. Under data analysis and policy resources, Some of these efforts are still underway, but SANDAG will be developing a regional database of various housing related data that will be made available. And then we'll be working on an anti-displacement study. And the one that has been completed is our pro-housing best practices. And then finally, under our regional initiatives, many of you participated in our housing policy forum that was last week. And our Housing Policy Leadership Academy is going to be kicking off next month. And so these are really efforts where we can come together as a region, share information, and make sure that we're all well informed about state legislation and things along those lines. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's get into RE 2.0. So RE 2.0 has very similar goals and objectives as our 2021 regional plan and SCS. So these are, again, those areas that Marissa spoke about, where we want to look at ways that we can accelerate infill and affordable development, realize multimodal communities, shift travel behavior, increase transit ridership, and address economic impacts of COVID. So the state has set out these objectives for the funding, but we really want to work with you all to figure out what does this mean for the San Diego region using our regional plan as a guide. So this is what we're really going to ask for your input on today. We want to hear from you. What are those creative ideas that you have that can really move the needle in our region, and what can be implemented in a relatively quick time frame? So let's go to the next slide. So again, just to look at that timeline, Marissa covered a lot of this, so I won't spend too much time here, but we are sort of just kicking off our outreach and education efforts around RE 2.0 with this meeting today. We anticipate many opportunities throughout this year to work with you all and get your input as we develop our full application for funding before that December timeframe. And then again, you know, having all funds expended by 2026. So as we think about receiving funds late in 2022, perhaps, and needing really to spend things by the end of 2025, we're looking at about a 3-year timeframe to implement this program. Okay, so we are going to get into some more Menti questions here shortly. But I wanted to reiterate these 3 areas that we're sort of focusing on today with RE 1.0, and this is how we're going to organize our questions to get your input today in these 3 areas. So local jurisdiction support, data analysis and policy resources, and then regional initiatives. So I'm going to go through each of these, and then we'll have some Menti questions associated with each of them as well. So first on local jurisdiction support, you know, Craig brought up this question just during the HCD presentation. We fully anticipate having a sub-allocation as part of this program. And so we're going to want your input on how best to do that. You know, doing a competitive grant program, what could that look like? Planning and capital activities would be eligible under this program. So how can we put together a competitive grant program that really meets the needs of our region? On education and outreach, some things that we've heard from local jurisdictions is that it could be helpful for us to come together as a region to engage our communities, to communicate to the public and stakeholders regarding housing and climate goals and the programs that we're all working on. So we'll want your input in that area. And then on technical assistance, some examples here that we could fund with the program could be resources for local jurisdictions to assist with CEQA streamlining or permit streamlining processes, templates for different ordinances or policies, and or other sort of contracting type mechanisms like our Sustainable Communities on-call, where we can work to offer a streamlined access to consultant services. Okay, so we're going to go back to Menti at this point, and we'd like you to respond to a couple questions about local jurisdiction support. So again, it's the same website and code. You should see that in the chat. And again, we'll have plenty of time after these questions for discussion. So if you want to elaborate on anything, we'll have time to do that as well. So the first question is here, which of the following forms of local government support would be most beneficial? So we're asking you to pick 3 here, things that resonate with you as being helpful to the work that you're trying to do around housing and climate, VMT reduction type programs. We're seeing a lot of interest in grant programs, both planning and capital. And the outreach and education materials. If there's something you have in mind that's not on this slide, keep that thought, because we'll have a follow-up question that's more open-ended where you can add your ideas. I see outreach and education in Arabic coming up. Translation and interpretation is definitely important in this program. This is good. Okay. So a lot of points here in the grant programs, permit streamlining, outreach and education, some consultant service assistance, a little bit less for templates and technical assistance. This is really helpful. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next question. So this is just an open-ended question. If you have ideas that weren't really captured in that last question or anything that you want to elaborate on, you can go ahead and write those in. I think, there we go. So these will kind of pop up as folks add ideas. So we'll leave this open for just a moment. We see a couple notes about translation, improving existing facilities, quick builds, policy. Let's see, low and very low income housing in the mobility hubs, connecting transit riders to affordable housing. Let's see, do these kind of scroll through, Nikki, as more pop up? There we go, lots of ideas. Anti-displacement. Oh, grant writers, that's a good idea. Gap financing. Education and outreach. Zero emission transportation. Schools as mobility hubs. Bike ped infrastructure. Okay. This is great. So I think we'll go ahead and go back to the slide. I think we can still leave this open if folks want to continue to add ideas. We'll go back to the slide and then we'll move on to the next set of questions here shortly. Okay, so our next kind of focus area here is on data analysis and policy resources. So here we're looking at what are those regional resources that we could provide at SANDAG that would assist our jurisdictions, developers, other folks in the housing kind of stakeholder community with their work on housing and development. So some ideas that we had here are on data gathering and sharing. So kind of creating centralized hub or clearinghouse for different data sets, and we'd love to get input. If you have specific ideas around what type of data would be helpful to you, we'd love to hear that today. Best practices, this could be collecting different case studies or developing things like design guidelines to be used across our region, other industry best practices, things in that realm. And then finally on policy resources, this could be efforts to track state legislation, new state policies, and how they're being implemented in our region, things in that realm. So we'll go back to Menti again and look for your input in these areas. So similar format, we have which of the following forms of data analysis and policy resources would be most beneficial, and ask you to pick 3 here. And then again, if you don't see something that you like here, we'll have that open-ended question. You can provide more detail on any of these or other ideas that you have. Looks like the Regional Housing and Mobility Data Clearinghouse is getting some votes. GIS mapping for things like site inventories, housing preservation. I think people generally like all of these, seems like. Design standards. Great. Okay. What is capital mapping? Do you want to answer that? I'm going to have Tuari Faola describe capital mapping. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, hi everyone. So the capital mapping that's on the screen here, really what we're looking at is how SANDAG can start to track some of the affordable housing development that are happening within the next 5 years. And then once we have a really good database of understanding where that development is occurring within the region, putting the financial aspect behind it and seeing if we can help our developers with matching the funding opportunities that are available at the different levels, state, and then potentially even in local, so that they're able to move those projects forward. So really taking a regional perspective and helping out all of our jurisdictions for that.
Okay. Okay. All right. So looks like most folks have answered that question. So maybe we can go ahead and move on to the open-ended question here. So this is, open-ended, tell us your ideas on how funds can support data analysis and policy resources. If you have any details on data that would be available, that you would like to have available. We'll give just a moment here. Don't see any answers popping up. Oh, there we go. Oh, data before and after projects are implemented. Some like monitoring. VMT from commuters from Riverside County. Okay, aligning developers with opportunities. So I think that gets at the capital mapping concept. That's great. How the region is implementing new state legislation. See a couple here on bike ped counters. Consistency and inclusionary housing ordinances, mode share data, state level advocacy. Great ideas coming in here. Income, % of income spent on housing. 2020 census data. Yes, we have our group at SANDAG working on that. So I'm sure there will be more to come on the census data soon. High injury network. Great. Great ideas. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to the slide. We'll have one more area of focus that we want to get your input on today. Okay, so this last one is on regional initiatives. And some of the ideas that we have kind of under this category are around collaboration, finance strategies, or other types of regional analysis. So there's some overlap there with the last question too. But for collaboration, this, we've heard that SANDAG is really well positioned to help bring people together, convene stakeholders so that we can continue to build that leadership within our region on housing and VMT reduction. And so this could be continued educational forums like the Housing Policy Forum and Academy that we're doing. Could be other roundtables or other ways to just make connections and identify opportunities to work together. For finance, we've heard from various stakeholders that SANDAG could pursue regional finance and revenue strategies that would really leverage economies of scale and offer more opportunities to fund affordable and equitable housing development in the region. And then on regional analysis, this could be other studies that help promote equity or raise the region's profile in terms of what we're doing on the ground in these areas. So let's go ahead and again, here we're interested in your ideas on regional initiatives, ways that SANDAG can really, facilitate regional approaches to addressing some of these issues. So here, we have which of the following regional initiatives would be most beneficial. So some of these collaboration efforts like educational forums or stakeholder roundtables, regional financing and revenue strategies, regional frameworks. Those are, ways that we could provide some guidance to the region. Other regional analyses on mobility and housing, and we can kind of dig into what folks think would be most beneficial there. We have coastal planning or development type toolkits and other regional toolkits. So things maybe beyond local jurisdiction type toolkits for those two, if there's other tools that could be developed to help the broader community. I see a lot of interest in the regional financing and revenue strategies and regional analyses on mobility and housing. Pretty good number for regional toolkits and informational educational forums. Great. Okay. And again, we'll have an open-ended question here. So if you have more detail on any of these ideas that you want to share, ideas that weren't covered here, we'll go ahead and go to that question. So tell us your ideas for how the REAP 2.0 funds can support regional initiatives. And really thank you guys for your active participation. This is really great. Regional Finance Authority like the Bay Area. Yes, that's something we want to look into. Regional Housing Vacancy Tax, Universal Free Transit, support for our partners, our NPO and CBO partners. Very good. Vision Zero, advocacy at the state level. Efforts that get actual units built. I think that's universally, we want, any of the ways we're spending funds, we really want to lead to on the ground implementation. So that's great. Social housing, vacancy studies, complete street infrastructure. Great. Okay, now before we leave Menti, we're going to ask just a couple more questions. So we'll finish up this one here pretty soon. And then after these, we'll have an open discussion. So first, we'll be continuing engagement, as I mentioned, throughout this year as we develop our application for RE 2.0. So we want to know what's our best way to keep you in the loop, to have folks come together to give us input as we develop this program. Newsletters, additional forums and roundtables, interviews, other informational meetings, social media, office hours. So we want to kind of gauge, do you like these larger forums where we bring a lot of people together? Do you like the more kind of interviews or office hours where you can share more specific information with SANDAG? Looks like people generally like the larger kind of forums, roundtables, and meetings. Hopefully we'll be able to do some in person before too long here, so that would be great. Great. Looks like there's some interest in interviews, newsletter. Okay. Okay, let's go on to the next question, Nikki. So this is, again, an open-ended question, how we can best engage stakeholders. If you have other creative ideas for outreach and engagement, or folks you feel like definitely need to be at the table in this process, that's what we're getting at here. We want to hear who needs to be at the table and what are the best ways to engage our community. So we see CBOs and transit agencies, health clinics, nonprofits. Great. Schools, builders, public health, military, seniors. So many people that are really critical when it comes to housing and how we develop our communities. So this is great. We're getting a lot of good ideas here. Faith-based organizations, affordable housing developers, the tribes. I will mention that if anyone on the line is, works with our tribal partners or is a member of one of the tribes, we'll have a couple meetings in the March timeframe to talk about RE 2.0 as well. So,
Yeah.
and
We'll
this
be doing.
go ahead,
be
Jane.
doing we'll be doing the
Good.
tribal working group on March 30th for all the tribes, and also going to the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Great. Okay, this is really good input. Thank you all. I think, do we have one more question, Nikki? Okay, this is just open-ended, and I think we can leave this open in the background on Menti too as we get into discussion, but is there anything we didn't touch on in these questions that you want to make sure we know as we're working on developing RE 2.0? We just want to make sure there's a way for you to add any other feedback that you have. Okay. Yes, the pandemic specific considerations. That's true. We didn't really get into that too much. And that is something we'll need to think about a bit more, understanding the funding source for the program. Simplifying grant requirements. Partners in TJ. Yes, our partners in Mexico. Great ideas here. Compensating folks for lived experience. This is good. Okay, contact info. We will have a slide on that, not to worry. Okay. Agreed. We definitely, I see this comment about this one-time opportunity. I think that's how we see it too. We really want to be impactful with this funding. Okay. All right, well, let's get back to our slide deck, and we'll share that contact info slide, and then we will turn it back to, here's the contact information. So we'll have discussion now, but just so you all are aware, you can follow along on our website, sandag.org/housing, social media. I have my contact information here. There's a large team of us that are working on the RE 2.0 program. So myself, Sam Solis, Tueri, who you saw, there are a number of us working on this. So we have our emails on here. Okay, so with that, I'll hand it back to our chair of the meeting to facilitate discussion. So you can raise your hand, working group members. And if you wouldn't mind sharing which working group you're part of when you're making your comments, just to make sure everyone knows who you are. Okay, with that, I'll hand it back to Tate.
Great, thank you, Allison. Thank you so much for leading us through that Menti questions, and thank you to all the working group members for their participation. We got some really great feedback. Now, for the part of our meeting to follow up with any comments, questions that working group members have of staff, or any sort of discussion or comments, observations that working group members would like to make. I will open it up for any working group members by a show of hands, and we'll just take it one by one. Maybe we'll just start off with the first round of questions and then follow-up questions, since we have a number of people who are on the meeting. And staff, if you see any hands and I don't see, please let me know. I see hand, Lisa from SEWG.
Hi, thank you so much for the information. All I wanted to share, and this is really exciting and lots of good information, is how do we, in the developer space, in the housing and innovation space, who is Sandag been working with? Who are the key partners that have been really active in this space, to take a really hard look at who do we not have in that space that could enhance the perspective, the lens of equity, and strategically connecting with different groups so that there is more of a presence of BIPOC development, who understand the needs of disadvantaged communities concerned, whatever term you want to use, and having some very specific conversations around that the social equity working group can really begin to help point out some guidance, and then connecting with groups that have been good developers in our communities where we provide a lot of the services, and is in areas where BMT would absolutely be a priority. So I think it's just having really focused, facilitated conversations and saying, okay, in this space, in the space of housing and development, who have we typically been working with, and who should we be working with more? Thank you.
And just want to make sure, does staff want to, any follow-up questions on that? Or
Yeah, I think, you know, this is a bit of a new arena for Sandag, having a housing program like this. So I really appreciate that comment. We're working to understand the space as well, and where exactly we fit at Sandag. So appreciate all of that input so that we can make sure we're being thoughtful on who we're including. I'm just looking to see if Tueri, do you have anything to add? No. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Barry with the Social Equity Working Group.
Hi, let me see. I'm not muted. My video is showing. Okay. All right. Normally I get going and I'm giving you my best stuff and the damn mic isn't even on. So, I have more of a question, you guys. And since, I think what you're somewhat new, I guess, bringing this to us and getting more involved in the housing. I applaud you for it. I'm wondering if how much control, or what word am I looking for? How much influence maybe you could have for certain things that will require the developers to get more interactive with the community before they get access to your funding, and get some development commitment on doing more effective outreach into the communities, and to be conscious of gentrification. I don't know what that looks like, right? But those are some areas that I constantly hear because of the ministerial sort of effort that is going on in the planning groups. Most developers take advantage of that, and they don't run anything by community. If they do, they make it clear that this is just a nicety, that they can literally do anything they want. And in this community, and probably in other communities, that's exactly what they're doing. And to get the city to change any policies, we have some things going in our planning group, but it would be nice if there was an outside agency that did prioritize our input as a community. And I'll give you a perfect example real quick. The MAC project is throwing up some affordable housing units. They're not paying any attention to what we're asking them to do. I mean, they give us lip service, but they're just keep rolling along, and it's butchering our neighborhood. It's taking a commercial area, literally, and making it more residents, and they don't care about the services and resources. So if there were some mechanism in place, and I don't know what that looks like, you guys, but I mean, I just want you to know about it. So if you have an opportunity to address it, that would be extremely helpful and beneficial, because right now we're getting trash thrown in our community. And they love it now, but in 5, 6, 7 years, you know what it's going to look like. And so that's the biggest input I have. I applaud you guys for getting involved. I applaud you guys for including us in this, because that's truly showing a good faith effort to actually do and have a partnership with what the community wants, as well as what the transportation group wants. I got it. I completely get it and understand it, but let's not lose sight of the big concept, and that is healthy, safe communities. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thanks for the time.
Yeah. Thank you for those comments, Barry. That's really helpful perspective. I'm looking at where I think she.
And so, Barry, thank you for the comments and thank you for applauding, but I would like to also just applaud and thank the state, because their recognition of where regional MPOs can help in this space and allowing us to have the funding and expanding our capabilities and what we're able to do for housing in our region, we think is really great. And so we really appreciate the comments that you're giving. And I think this is exactly what we want to hear and what we're thinking about in terms of how we want to suballocate our funds, the type of uses that we use, that $43 million for the RE 2.0 program. And certainly, we're engaging with you and the community as we're starting to develop and use our RE 1.0, but putting those kind of guidelines or criteria in place is something that we would want to explore as we're suballocating those funds, whether it be to cities, to tribes, transit agencies, or if we used it for developers. And that would be a process that we would want to come back in a forum and to our specific working groups, to the community, and engage you as we develop that. So certainly, I think very well received comments, and we'll want to engage and talk with you on that more. And thank you very much, Lisa, for uplifting Barry's comment in the chat.
And you triggered something for me. Add to that list the red-lined areas in our communities that are still being ignored. I mean, it's crazy. It's like I live in the twilight zone, right? You see all this data and nobody's doing anything with it. you know, and so the redlining group that we have now, area, is the same one that was back in the 1920s. That is crazy. So if you could tie a little bit of funding to sort of, I don't know I don't know why that happens, you know? So anyway, that would throw that in there too, is the redlining area, and strap that to your funding, and let's see if that generates some movement. Okay,
Thank you, Barry.
thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Craig with the Social Equity Working Group.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. Thank you for bringing up the issue of gentrification. Two things. First of all, and this is, I'll get on my opinion soapbox. This is really an historic confluence time where we see concentration of both environmental climate change goals and housing affordability goals. And these dollars can be used to achieve those things. In the realm of gentrification, over the last 4 years, in the Social Equity Working Group, we've consistently brought up the issue of displacement, gentrification, the negative impacts it can have on bringing development into already urbanized areas. Displacement can be a negative effect not only in already urbanized areas, but also in more rural areas if development occurs out there. So I'm wondering if there could be in the expenditure of REAP dollars some assessment of how displacement and the negative impacts of gentrification can be assessed and avoided.
Yeah, Craig, thank you for that question. We, through our RE 1.0 funds, are going to be soon beginning work on our anti-displacement study. So looking at exactly, you know, how we can better understand the issue, what are some strategies out there. So that's more to come, and that's going to be kicking off sooner during our RE 1.0 funding. So we look forward to working with the Social Equity Working Group, absolutely, in that process.
Great. And, you know, as REAP dollars are spent, especially in this new round, if there could just be some kind of explicit assessment of that as those dollars are expended. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Tate,
Craig.
I did see one question in the chat here about if this program is connected with the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. It's not, it's a separate funding source. So I think, you know, for some folks who have applied for that program, we know the San Diego region has somewhat struggled to be competitive in that program. So we are looking forward to having this formula program so that the San Diego region, you know, has the resources to implement some of the programs that the state is trying to fund.
Does anybody else have any questions? I thought I saw one or two hands. Elizabeth Liu with the NSDI Working Group.
Thank you for this opportunity. I want to add on what Mr. Paula said just a few minutes ago. When it comes to housing, low income are really in a very bad shape. And especially refugees families. They are housed in apartments which were built maybe 70, 80 years ago. Most of their living condition is so very bad. And as such, you find a lot of health issues among refugees. It can be asthma, diabetes, and stress, depression, a lot of issues. Their homes, most of their homes are full of mice, cockroaches, moles, and leaking roofs. Landlords don't take care of it. When they make noise, what they hear is, you will be evicted. If you don't want it, get out. So those are conditions that refugees are living in. I'm so happy to be part of this discussion. And as Mr. Berry said, let there be a mechanism for any agency that will take funding from SANDAG in the name of housing, so that the really hard hit population, the population that is really struggling, their needs be met. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate those comments. And one thing I just wanted to recognize that we are working on a housing framework right now. One other thing I didn't mention, that we have a subcommittee of our board now focused on regional equitable housing. And they are working on providing input on this housing framework as well. And so there are various topics that we're looking at in that we'll want to get input, from others as well as we develop this framework. But looking at standards of living, healthy homes, healthy communities, that's something we want to explore in that framework and figure out what are those priorities, what's the role that SANDAG can play through our, the mechanisms that we have. So appreciate that.
Thank you. Allow me to add this. During this pandemic, refugees are the hard hit. And I know most of the families who have been really affected, and some members died here in San Diego because of pandemic, and that combines their living conditions. You find 8 people in a small apartment, they all become sick of COVID-19, including children 2.5 years old. Can you imagine? Who is going to save these people? Who is going to help them move to a better place or address their housing issue? So I thank SANDAG for taking this leadership. Thank you.
Barry, I see you there real quick. Let me just.
Yeah, I just got one other thing to add. Can you put in our little Christmas list, assistance for first-time buyers? Have some sort of funds available, either directly or indirectly, to help people get into these homes. That will slow down gentrification, right? So what I'm thinking of is to have some sort of mechanism. It can be in the way of giving more incentives to some of these developers if there were a mechanism that they could lower the threshold so people can afford to buy these homes. So that's just a Christmas list. Add that baby to it. You might get a chance to at least maybe start the conversation with other folks as issues to certainly deal with. And then I'll be quiet.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. I thought I saw Mohammed. Yes, Mohammed with Social Equity Working Group. You have the floor.
Yeah, hello everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so part of this meeting is talking about a new funding. So I'm for sure, I'm glad that there will be funding, but on a lot of times when I hear some things that was really working good, which is the social equity group with SANDAG, that was really working good. And we were participating as refugees and Middle Eastern Arabic community to be part of this group. That is really great. We've been doing really good with funding and with no funding. So we participate in this meeting for years for no funding or half funding. So we're glad with this. We're okay with this. Sometimes when we hear there is a big funding come in, this is what scares us as ethnic community-based organization for one reason, that when it comes to funding, there will be another organization or bigger organization who come and represent our community instead of us. And this is what I'm kind of afraid of. Maybe other smaller agencies who are part of the social equity group, that we're afraid that bigger organizations who does not represent our communities will be there and compete for the funding. It's not about the funding, but it's about the community voice that needs to be there when there is a planning. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison, do you see any other?
I don't
Comment.
see
Yeah.
any other working group member hands. We do have 2 hands from the public, so we could go ahead and take the public comment now if you'd like.
All right, just one last opportunity from anybody from the working group. If you have any comments or questions you'd like to ask or mention, please feel free to just raise your hand. Just wait for a few seconds just in case. All right, I'm not seeing any, so let's go ahead and take comments and questions from members of the public who are participating today.
Great. So first, we have Madison Coleman. You should be able to speak now.
Great. Hello, I'm Madison Coleman, policy advocate with Climate Action Campaign. I'm also part of the stakeholders, equity stakeholders working group at the city of San Diego. I have 2 specific questions. One is that can Sandag use RE 2.0 funds to then apply for other state housing grants such as Home Key or other funding sources? And then the second one is, have you all thought about committing, or can you even do this? Can you commit a set percentage or set amount of funds of RE 2.0 to go specifically to communities of concern or disadvantaged communities, low income communities, so on and so forth? Yeah, thanks. Thanks for answering.
Good question. Allison, did you want?
Yeah, I don't think I have an answer to the first question about using REAP dollars to apply for other state programs. If anyone from the state, from HCD, is still on the line and would like to address that, they can, or that's something we can look into. And then on committing a certain percentage to particular populations, I think that's absolutely something we want to consider in developing the program.
Great, thanks.
All right. And do we have another member of the public who would like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yes, the next person with their hand up is Don.
Hi, my name is Don Wood. I was a founding member of the Sandag Energy Working Group. I retired several years ago due to health. I am now the senior policy advisor at Pacific Energy Policy Center, which is located in La Mesa, California. And this looks to us like a tipping point or an opportunity point that Sandag really needs to take advantage of. You have a unique situation today where we have $5 per gallon gasoline at the pump. That gives a lot of people a disincentive to take their car to work or to school as they begin to form new travel habits, because COVID is starting to lighten up and employers are likely to start requiring employees to come to work. So as people are forming new travel habits, new commuting habits, it seems to us that we need to take advantage of that and give people as much incentive as possible to get out of their cars, get onto transit, which is the most direct way to reduce VMTs. And so in addition to taking advantage of the $5 per gallon, which is a stick, we suggest a carrot, which would be universal free transit for people of all ages, regardless of their school or their seniority or their disabilities. Anybody who wants to can get on the trolley for free. It'd be a limited time period because this is obviously not unlimited money. But the information we could gain from a pilot project like this should be very useful in directing our efforts in the future, including our efforts in trying to get additional funding from Washington to keep free transit going over time if we can show positive VMP effects of the pilot. So please, please think about that. This isn't just about building more houses, more affordable houses, which is a joke in San Diego. You're never going to get affordable houses if you leave it to the developers. It'd be crazy to build affordable housing when they can sell unaffordable housing and sell it as quick as they can build it. But in addition to thinking about building more houses near transit, think about giving people more incentives for taking that transit and making it a habitual part of their daily transportation efforts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Don. Appreciate that comment. Are there any other public comments?
Yes, we also have David Grubb.
Hi, David.
So thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm David Grubb, a longtime member of the Energy Working Group, but no longer involved with that group. Currently serving as the chair of the housing team of the Quality of Life Coalition and learning the housing business. And to build on what Don just said, we will never get affordable housing if we leave it up to the developers. That's the harsh reality. And since you have this funding opportunity, you really need to start looking at the only way we're going to get affordable housing is if Sandag and the local jurisdictions get into the business of providing some affordable housing. And there are mechanisms for doing that. Community Land Trust, for example, would be an excellent use of some of this funding. Allows you to create housing that is affordable and stays affordable. So I would urge you to stay focused on things that are actually going to improve the situation for the people who need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Before I go back to members of the working group, I just want to see if there are any members of the public who want to make a comment. Seeing there is none, I do see a hand up. A couple went down, but I'm going to see Craig. Craig.
Yes, thank you. And what David Grubb had to say reminded me, one of the other ways to achieve truly affordable housing is for there to be across the board, across all jurisdictions in our region, inclusionary housing requirements. Those are not now universal. They're piecemeal in our region, and they really should be universal across all jurisdictions. It would be good for some of the limited kind of analysis, administrative dollars from REAP to spend on analyzing what we have now, what we don't have, and kind of providing a baseline of what inclusionary housing requirements should be for all our jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Is there anybody, Nicole, with Active Transportation Working Group?
Thanks, Tate, and thank you, Sandag, for holding this and letting us input, and appreciate so many comments from all the others. And I just wanted to quickly ask a question, just because I recently read an article and the subtitle was "A Way to Rent Without Making Someone Else Rich." So that's really what it's all about, right? Is there a way that we have a mechanism, or is I'm not involved with a lot of the housing conversations, but a public ownership of housing that the agency can look into. So I did throw a link to an article in the Menti. And I just, one of the main things, we need a housing option that combines accessibility, flexibility, and limited risk of renting with some of the stability and wealth generating potential of home ownership. And I think that's exactly what others are talking about with land trusts and other things. So just a comment. Thank you again.
Thanks, Nicole. And feel free to also put that link in the chat for others that may not have seen in the Menti comments. Barry? You're on mute.
Oops. There's a lot of folks from the city and the planning and housing. I'd love to hear from them. I mean, you've heard from us, you've heard from residents, and I'd love to hear where they are on this. Any of the city planning folks or, yeah. So those of you from the city, don't be shy. Does this make sense? Is this doable? What are your thoughts about this? Because if this isn't going to happen in a silo, the city has got to get engaged. And that doesn't mean standing on the sidelines. So that's sort of an open question and an invite. Crickets.
Thank you for that comment. I can certainly ask if there's anybody from any of the cities. I'm not sure if that's directly the city. Barry, you mean the city of San Diego?
Yeah.
Okay. So I could certainly say we're certainly from the city of San Diego, willing and wanting to work very much with all the social equity partners and community as we go forward in looking at different planning efforts, whether that's looking at community plan updates or different initiatives to address a number of the issues brought up as part of our code updates and so forth. Your point about redlining and addressing the long-term effects of that is one of the things that we certainly are looking at and want to make positive steps to addressing with our programs. So yes, I'm listening. I think just as all the Sandag staff is to all the various comments made by the public and members of the social equity working group. So I certainly appreciate your participation and look forward to working with everybody in the near future. And that's not, just dependent upon Sandag funding, but in the work that we do, but it certainly would, and even if Sandag didn't make that a requirement, that's something that we want to do moving forward. So I appreciate all your comments. Thank you. Are there any other, to Barry's invitation, members of local jurisdictions, my fellow colleagues at the city of San Diego, who would like to make any comments?
Hey, I did want to acknowledge there's one comment in the chat from Christine about telecommuting and if this program could help address a backslide in telecommuting now that the pandemic is ending. And just want to share, we do have our iCommute program, our TDM group at Sandag. There are other funding sources that we can use for TDM programs, including encouraging telecommuting, telework policies. So we have existing programs in that area. I think our efforts under REAP 2.0 can definitely complement those as well. So we are looking at things holistically.
So again, I would ask if there's any members from other working groups, especially from public jurisdictions, cities, county, that would like to make any comments from what we've heard today or any questions to Sandag staff. I certainly would encourage it. All right. Are there any, Allison, are there any members of the public that have their hands up that want to speak? I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity before we close the meeting.
I don't see any at this time.
All right, great. So let's see. At this time, I would like to invite Antoinette to make closing remarks on the REAP 2.0 program and any other announcements that Sandag has.
Thank you, Tate. I want to be respectful of your time. Really quickly, a couple of agency updates that I wanted to share with you. One is you're probably wondering why I'm standing up here as Regional Planning Director when that was Colleen Clemenson's role up until about 3 weeks ago. So we have gone through a little bit of a reorganization here at Sandag, and Colleen, who was the Regional Planning Director, moved up to our CEO.
Deputy CEO of Planning and Programs at Sandag, and then Ray Major stepped into a Deputy CEO role for business operations. So with that, we consolidated what was our Mobility and Innovation Department. I was the Director of Mobility and Innovation previously with the Regional Planning Department, and now we're one big regional planning family. I also wanted to give you an update, having the opportunity with all of you together on working group restructuring. So over the last year, I think many of you had heard that we were going through the process of evaluating Sandag working groups. And the background there is that this was a recommendation that came out of the agency's organizational effectiveness plan that was developed back in 2019. And our executive committee asked us to take a look at Sandag working groups and come back with some recommendations for how we could restructure to make them more effective and provide more meaningful opportunities for engagement with our member agencies and the public. So we finished that process of analyzing the working groups. What we found is that we had 23 working groups at Sandag. Each one of those working groups takes about 40 hours of staff time to coordinate. And a lot of them were struggling to, have attendance and participation, agenda items, or there was a lot of redundancy and overlap between the working groups. So we brought a recommendation to executive committee last week to consolidate some of those similar working groups into 2 new working groups, and that reduced the number from 23 Sandag working groups to 11. The 2 new working groups are a mobility working group. So that group will report into the transportation committee. It will be chaired by a non-voting member of the transportation committee. So it provides a much better link between the working group and that policy advisory committee group. And their focus is really on transportation plans, programs, and policies. And the member agencies will have 1 voting member each, and we'll get to select the staff member that participates in that working group, and we'll revisit that membership every couple of years. The other working group is the Sustainable Communities Working Group, and that group will consolidate a variety of working groups that cover topics in the region's sustainable communities strategy. So that's housing, land use coordination, environmental initiatives, climate, and that working group will report into the Regional Planning Committee, again, shared by a non-voting member of the Regional Planning Committee. So it has that direct connection back into the Policy Advisory Committee. And the cities will be, and the county will be choosing the staff member that sits on that group. So that's what's happening with working group restructuring. We're going to be working with all of you over the next few months to implement that new structure, and looking forward to partnering with you all on this incredible REAP program. So such a huge opportunity for the region, but as Barry said, it's going to require a lot of partnerships. And so we're looking forward to having continuing conversations as the program evolves. So happy to answer any questions if you have any. If not, I'll let you get on with your day.
Does anybody have any questions?
Just thank you, guys. That's all.
Thank you, Barry. Craig?
This new Sustainable Communities Working Group, I think we look forward to hearing more about it. And if it could somehow bring together we, the public, CBO type representatives and the general public, but also representatives from the staffs of the jurisdictions in our region. Good.
Right. You are correct, Craig.
Perfect.
And we can come to the next social equity working group if there's space on the agenda and just give a little bit more of a detailed update on that for you. Okay.
Well, I would certainly, I'm hopeful going forward as we have more of these sorts of discussions as you go through the reorganization process. We'll have an opportunity to cross-pollinate from different disciplines, as well as obviously getting important feedback from members of the Social Equity Committee and working group and members of the public and at large. I think will overall make not only the reprogram, but all the different work and endeavors that we do at Sandag more beneficial. So I thank everybody for their participation today during this item. And before we close out and adjourn, I do want to go to item number 3, which is our non-agenda public comments. If this is an opportunity for any members of the public who wish to make comments on a discussion or not that was not on today's agenda or non-agenda public comment. Do we have any members of the public who want to make a comment? Allison?
I don't see any hands raised at this time.
All right, not seeing any hands raised, I'll go ahead and close that item and finally move to adjournment. Again, I just want to thank members of the various working groups for joining us today and participating. And I want to thank also HCD staff as well as Sandag staff for all the time and effort that they put into making this working group or this forum today a success. So thank you for all their hard work. And with that, I will adjourn today's meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
See you, everybody.